Hey guys, trying to record a video for you this week. The internet's down um, in my area, but hopefully this is going to work. I'm trying to use a hotspot to do this. So we're talking this week about two stories: Shirley Jackson's "The Summer People," and then Leonora Carrington, her story "White Rabbits." I'm just going to say a few things about these. Shirley Jackson's very famous horror weird fiction writer. Um, her probably her most famous story is The Lottery, which is a great story. But she's also, if you liked The Summer People, which is a little more subtle in its horror or weird elements, I would definitely check her out. She's also famous for The Haunting of Hill House, which is her novel that's been made into numerous movies. Kind of capturing the whole concept of the haunted house and how that mimics the human psyche. Summer People's kind of an unusual story. You have the Allisons who move they go to their summer house in Upper New York from the city. They're a fairly well off couple, so that they can do this. Certainly, I don't know that you would consider them rich, although they're rich enough to own a summer house in Upper New York State. So and the story becomes progressively more weird as we go. And the Allisons, I think, are you know spending their time there in the summers, and I think one of the things that people don't realize that are tourists or people who visit certain communities that are basically established or thrive on the tourist industry is that a lot of the people that live there, they don't have a choice as to whether they live there, right? They might have been born there, they might be working jobs that they were kind of born into, like family type situations where it's like maybe they didn't feel like they have a choice, or they may not make that much money, and then you have a lot of rich people who kind of descend on the town and exploit it for what it is over the summertime, and then they leave, and the people's lives kind of go back to normal. But in this instance, the Allisons decide that they're going to stay on, and as we can see, the people in the town seem to not like that. There's a lot of symbolism with that, with the storm that's rolling in towards the cabin, and the phone gets cut, and the car has been sabotaged. And so we kind of get this idea that these people have overstayed their welcome. And so there's that sense of isolation again that we see in a lot of these stories. But also, I think one of the things about Summer People is that we don't often recognize how reliant we are on other people. And in America specifically, that's always been, sort of the rugged individualist is just going to go out and live their own lives. But in order to live in any type of community, you're fairly reliant on other people. And so I think that often gets overlooked in our culture. And what happens when those people that you're so reliant upon decide that they don't like you anymore, right? So we see a little bit of that with the Allisons, and it's kind of a creeping dread in the story. Like they slowly start to realize that something is wrong, and they slowly start to realize that maybe they've overstayed their welcome. Maybe they're not as welcome as they thought, right? You'll notice Mrs. Allison makes a lot of assumptions about the people in the town that are pretty bigoted. So they're not the nicest people. So kind of an interesting story to see how she builds that dread as the story goes along. If you're paying attention, it's very subtle. It's not necessarily something I would call horrific, but it's definitely a piece of the weird. And then Leonora Carrington's story is also about isolation. I think this is much more overt. I think she was also an artist and a painter. So if you want to look her up, she's got some pretty cool stuff. She did a lot of abstract stuff. She was part of the surrealist movement. White Rabbits is interesting. We find this character who's isolated in the city, and there's a lot of symbolism in this to suggest that this character is suffering from some kind of mental illness. She's almost, we see her at the beginning, the way she describes the city, it's almost as if she's living in hell, right? So that's reflective of her mental state. And then she has this strange encounter with the woman across the street who's feeding bones to the birds. And somehow she gets enticed by this woman to come to this apartment next door, this house next door, and she makes her way in, not easily, but she somehow makes her way in, and her discovers has that weird encounter with the woman and her husband who has some form of leprosy, which again suggestive of madness. For a long time people have been for a long time people were scared of mental illness, and I think there's still some of that. Like, that's one of the reasons that asylums were established, because people were afraid that, hey, if we allow these people to mix with society, this kind of madness can spread. And then you have the whole thing with the white rabbits and what they're doing there, and they're carnivores, right? They're the opposite of what we see rabbits doing typically, although rabbits proliferate very quickly. I think the white rabbits are symbolic of madness, symbolic of mental illness, symbolic of our main character maybe just wanting to escape. There's a subtext of that throughout, and that these white rabbits sort of represent, because the white rabbits eat everything, right? So almost like they're just eating up space and time. They just seem to have proliferated throughout that house. And so maybe, right, one of the possibilities of this story is that this character is so distraught, so upset, suffering so badly that she's thinking of a way out. The neighbor and her husband certainly represent some form of annihilation or death. White can represent that, I think, in terms of the rabbits and the way that they are just everywhere. It's almost like a blanket covering over everything. Madness has been described that way. Annihilation has been described that way. So I think that could be what's going on here. It's a very unusual story. I think interesting too that her husband's name is Lazarus. So there's definitely some biblical connection there with someone being resurrected, right? So maybe her encounter with these folks will be some type of resurrection for her, as she barely escapes at the end, right? Like Lot and his family that's another biblical allusion. So if you're familiar with that at all, I think it would make a big impact. Both of them dealing with that sense of isolation and how reliant we are on other people. I think summer people, the Allisons, take that for granted, whereas our character in White Rabbits, she doesn't seem to have anybody to rely on, and so she seems to be very excited and accepting of this strange neighbor's offer, and maybe takes her up too quickly on that. So, but I think the effects that isolation can have on people can be pretty severe, as we saw last week. So this is a big theme that you'll see in weird fiction. Leonora Carrington's artwork is very much reflective of this. It's almost like she's trying to drop you into some crazy dream, and this is very dreamlike. So I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. We will be back next week. If you have any questions or comments, shoot me an email, and I will see you guys then. Bye-bye.